Welcome to today's episode of Literary Lessons. Here we delve into the stories and authors that have shaped American literature, brought to you by today's host, Noah Miller. The focus of today's episode will be to enlighten listeners to the depth of Bambara's iconic short story, The Lesson. We will address its historical influences and also delve into Bambara herself and what drove her to write such a moving story. Bambara, deeply influenced by her upbringing in Harlem, New York, and her heavy involvement in mid-20th century social movements such as the Civil Rights Movement and Black feminism, utilizes her short story The Lesson to act as a form of literary protest against the social and economic inequality present in the America of her day. Her experiences with the rich cultural history of Harlem, including the echoes of the Harlem Renaissance, helped shape her voice as a powerful advocate for social justice. In The Lesson, Bambara challenges readers to confront systemic oppression and class disparity. Much like her peers, Bambara uses her literature as a call to action against injustice. To fully grasp the themes we will be addressing, we'll first need to tackle the historical context of race and racial struggles within America, specifically those of African Americans. Stay tuned as we break down this amazing work and uncover the historical and social context which shaped one of the most compelling voices in African American literature. As we unpack the importance of the themes behind Toni Cade Bambara's The Lesson, it's essential that we understand the historical context surrounding race in America. The setting of The Lesson is in mid-20th century Harlem, New York. Looking at the historical context, this is an America still very much struggling to come to terms with the legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. American slavery was legalized in 1641 when Massachusetts became the first ever colony to officially legalize institutional slavery. Eventually, the institution of slavery would split the nation. The northern states, or the Union, would fight to end slavery, and the southern states, or the Confederacy, would fight to preserve it. The Union would eventually win the war, and slavery was soon after abolished on December 6, 1865. But this was not the end, as new laws of segregation were legalized in attempts to halt African American success. These laws were upheld in Plessy v. Ferguson, in which the Supreme Court held that African Americans were to be separate but equal. The systemic racism and segregation established within these Jim Crow laws would not be overturned until the Supreme Court decision of Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, a full 89 years since the end of slavery. Movements such as the Civil Rights Movement, Black Arts Movement, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were all major movements that fought for the social, political, and economic equality of African Americans. But racial inequality was still heavily persistent across American society. From education, economic status, and employment were all very much reliant on an individual's race. During the century since the abolishment of slavery, the Great Migration saw millions of African Americans move from the American South to cities in the North, Midwest, and West. Cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, and New York saw heavy rates of African American migrants who hoped for a new start and a brighter future. This leads us to our next important topic. Let's now delve into Harlem, New York, and look into its rich African American history. Let's delve into the historical context behind the setting of Toni Cade Bambara's short story, The Lesson. Harlem's rich African American history provides cultural and historical context which deeply influences the themes included in The Lesson. Known for its rich cultural history, Harlem has been a key hub for African American art since the Great Migration. It was the epicenter of the Harlem Renaissance, a massively influential cultural movement in the 1920s to 30s that saw the creation of a new wave of black art, literature, and music. It also laid the foundation by which later social activism, such as the Civil Rights Movement and the Neo-Black Arts Movement, would build off of. An important focus of the Renaissance was the reclaiming and expression of African American thought. In his scholarly article titled Suspended Effect in Harlem Renaissance Poetics, Sean Weidman articulates the importance of print culture within such movements not bound by the views and constraints of white-controlled systems. He writes, quote, "In fact, perhaps no better avenue existed for Renaissance witness-bearing and remonstrance than its print culture, which supplied African Americans with new forms for self-definition and material archives for self-organization, securing them a marketplace that trafficked in discursive resistance to white America's cultural, social, political, and legal constructions of blackness." End quote. In this article, he writes on the reclaiming of black vernacular as one of the key challenges that African American writers faced during the Harlem Renaissance. The long-standing exclusion of black voices from every form of popular discourse did not allow black literature the time to develop and evolve the lived experiences of the African American populace. But the writers of the Harlem Renaissance were beginning to change this. This point will be mirrored in Bambara's own work, which we'll discuss later in the episode. Harlem was also privy to significant economic hurdles and societal struggles. Open Learn University includes an article on the history of Harlem, breaking down the following. Black employment was falling in the 1930s, with Harlem holding double the general unemployment rate across all of New York, and increasing rates of crime and drug abuse were beginning to take hold. But with this brief rundown of Harlem and its important historical context closing up, let's jump into the activist and genius herself, Toni Cade Bambara. Toni Cade Bambara was an activist for civil rights and black feminism. She was a mother, writer, novelist, critic, and leader of her community. Born on March 25, 1939, she was raised in Harlem, New York. Linda Roche, a professor of English and American Studies at Wesley College, includes a biography of Toni Cade Bambara with her collection titled 20th Century and Contemporary American Literature and Context. It details Bambara's pursuit of education and writing and theater. During this era of education, she would edit her feminist anthology titled The Black Woman. Releasing in 1970, it would bring her instant literary acclaim from many of the social activists and black feminists of the time. Soon after, she would publish a short story collection titled Gorilla My Love. This is the collection which first includes The Lesson. In Leo Nessa's article, In Memory, Toni Cade Bambara, Passing on the Story, Nessa provides a biography for Bambara and details her importance through various quotes from the author herself. One such quote details how Bambara viewed her writings. Quote, "Writing is a legitimate way, an important way, to participate in the empowerment of the community." End quote. This perfectly encapsulates Bambara's literature on black empowerment and feminism. Another quote from Bambara describes how she uses her writings. Quote, "A weapon, a real instrument for transformational politics." End quote. Bambara, through her writing, contributed a great deal to important social movements like the Civil Rights Movement and Black Arts Movement, and solidified herself as one of the predominant voices of black feminism. With this understanding of Bambara's commitment to providing a voice to the voiceless and protesting social injustice, let's begin to examine how the historical context of race in America directly informs and manifests itself within the themes in the lesson. Understanding the historical context of race in America is pivotal to understanding the themes within the lesson. Bambara centers the story on the theme of socioeconomic inequality. Through our main character, Sylvia, readers witness as Bambara protests the disparities in American society through the eyes of a child. With the main theme understood, we can contextualize it within the broader importance of American socioeconomic and racial standing throughout history, and try to grasp how Bambara handles this theme in her narrative. The story takes place somewhere around 1960 in Harlem, New York, within the main character's neighborhood in the more affluent Fifth Avenue in downtown. The lesson is told from Sylvia's first-person point of view. Everything that happens throughout the story is conveyed to the readers through Sylvia's narration. Sylvia is a child in this story, deeply influenced by her upbringing and the world around her. The 1960s was a time of deep division between racial lines. For example, a citation from Lisa McKay, a senior writer for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, explains that by 1960, the average wealth gap between white Americans and black Americans was 8-1. The focus of the previous section, in which we cover the history of race in America, can contextualize these economic disparities. 2 words: systemic racism. From institutional slavery, to Jim Crow laws, to redlining, to education, systemic racism has infected basically every facet of American society, and therefore, the American economy. When we see our main character, a child, grasp her own standing within American society, and deal with her intense emotions, very much not suited for a child of her age, we can look to the historical context of systemic racism playing the main antagonist, dragging Sylvia and her peers down to poverty and racial degradation. But rejoice, for this is not a story of defeat, but of standing up to harsh realities and persisting through one's systemic shackles. We'll now cover the importance of Harlem and its history in relation to the themes we've covered here. Harlem, as a setting for the lesson, is perfect to explore the themes of social and economic inequality. Bambara utilizes this setting to portray the black experience in America at the time. The main focus is on the children from a low-income, predominantly black neighborhood, and just one taxi ride later, the children are dropped off in the downtown affluent Fifth Avenue. When Sylvia arrives on Fifth Avenue, she notes that everyone is dressed up and thinks, quote, "White folks crazy," end quote. What's more, the guide and educators throughout the story act as a conduit by which the kids, predominantly Sylvia, can begin to grasp and confront the systems of oppression that bind her and her community. Returning to Sean Weedman's breakdown of Harlem Renaissance poetics, we can contextualize the importance of Harlem history on the lesson. Weedman explains that one of the key challenges that African American writers faced during the Harlem Renaissance was the reclaiming of black vernacular. This key point of past Harlem writers would later centralize the Black Arts Movement, of which Bambara was a major player. Jennifer Smith provides an examination of the Black Arts Movement and its literature in her 2001 book Short Stories for Students. Quote, typical literature of the movement was generally written in African American English vernacular, was confrontational in tone, and addressed such issues as interracial tensions, socio-political awareness, and the relevance of African history and culture to African Americans. End quote. Here's a quote which exemplifies Bambara's mastery of Black vernacular and themes relevant to the Black arts movement, all within the lesson. Quote, what kind of work they do, and how they live, and how come we ain't in on it? Where we are is who we are, Miss Moore always pointing out, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. She always adds and then waits for somebody to say that poor people have to wake up and demand their share of the pie, and ain't none of us know what kind of pie she talking about in the first damn place. End quote. This deep connection to the people and culture of Harlem, found in Bambara's literary style, pays deep homage to Harlem's rich racial history and Bambara's own life of activism. Toni Cade Bambara used her lived experiences and social perception of the mid-20th century, as well as the historical context of Harlem and Black activism to shape her literature. She utilizes the style of Black vernacular, popularized in the Harlem Renaissance, to better encapsulate the lived experience of Black people within American society. She chose the life of activism and social justice and made that the focus of her writing, expertly utilizing her influences from activism, and namely the new Black arts movement and Black feminist movement. In the prior mentioned source from Lee Onesto includes a quote from Bambara which beautifully sums up Bambara and her life's ultimate literary battle. Quote, 1. We are at war. 2. The natural response to oppression, ignorance, evil, and mystification is widespread resistance. 3. The natural response to stress and crisis is not breakdown and capitulation, but transformation and renewal. End quote. This quote sums up Bambara's literary philosophy expertly. It also matches perfectly with the lesson when contextualized. Sylvia loses her ignorance regarding the oppression she faces, and the final 2 lines of the story read, quote, she can run if she want to and even run faster, but ain't nobody gonna beat me at nothing. End quote. This portrayal exemplifies a transformed Sylvia, not dejected from facing the systemic truth, but emboldened by it. In this episode, we delved deep into the historical context behind the setting of Toni Cade Bambara's short story, The Lesson, paying special attention to Bambara's masterful interweaving of racial history in America, as well as the social movements of the early to mid-20th century, such as the Harlem Renaissance and Black arts movement, which helped to embolden and contextualize the themes of socioeconomic inequality in mid-20th century America within her short story, The Lesson. In our examination of the historical context of race in America, as well as the rich racial history of Harlem, New York, and of course, Bambara herself, it's clear to see that Bambara was deeply conscious of the socioeconomic environment of her time and built upon the powerful themes of social activism that influenced herself and so many other authors. Toni Cade Bambara was an activist first and a writer second. The lesson serves as both a reflection of the time and a call to action for those who grasp its relevant themes of social justice and equality. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Literary Lessons. I hope our exploration of Bambara and her short story has sparked a similar fire for activism as it has within myself. Wishing you a great week. Until next time, keep reading.